Welcome to the Imaginative Storm channel. I'm your host, James Navé. This show first aired on WPVM FM as a Twice 5 Miles radio podcast, and now we have it here for you. My guest today is Ocean Vuong. I met Ocean years ago, and he came to Taos, I guess maybe 3-4 years ago, to be the featured poet at the Taos Poetry Festival. I had a chance to interview Ocean, and so this is the interview that you'll hear today. And before we get to the interview, if you would like to join us any Saturday morning for the Imaginative Storm Writing Prompt of the Week session from 10 to 11 Mountain Time and noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we'd love to have you. Imaginativestorm.com. This interview with Ocean took place on the front porch of Allegra Huston's house, my creative collaborator for Imaginative Storm work. And I opened the interview by asking Ocean to describe what was right in front of him. So here's what he said.
There's horizons after horizons piled on top of one another, and I'm looking at these beautiful blue mountains, and it just seems like something that is so conducive and forgiving to the creative mind. I think oftentimes in cities, the sounds are always competing with your thoughts. A landscape like this is, in a way, a canvas in which your mind is allowed to roam and to continue to explore itself and stretch out. And I didn't expect that to happen when I came here, and it's been the past 4 or 5 days. My mind has just been reeling, and I can see why Georgia O'Keeffe decided to set roots here, among other great writers and artists.
How do you draw from the circumstances around you?
Pay attention to the world. I think, oftentimes we have this weird sense that creativity comes from this inspired moment. Even the word inspiration comes from the Greek root of to be breathed into. So we're expecting this eureka moment, this light bulb flashing, coming on. But I think it's actually a lot more mundane, painstaking, but also less glamorous than that. I think just paying attention to the minutiae of your environment, with the faith that at any given moment something can happen, even if it's just stillness, something can come out of that.
In the workshop that you taught, you talked about how you have a different view of work.
Work is very interesting. I think I come from a family of rice farmers, and I think it's very important to me that work, even creative work, remains and is focused on the body. Work coming from the body, moving through the body. And I try to resist notions of production where, I don't want to pressure myself to produce a certain amount of pages, a certain amount of words. We often hear how creative work is often qualified through quantity. And I think it's often arbitrary, because no matter how many words you have, no matter how many pages you have, if you haven't done the quote-unquote work of asking those questions, pushing yourself to interrogate the wonders and joys of your subjects, then the work has not actually been done. So I take myself away from actually writing or producing, and I put the work in my body. I'll take ideas and subjects. I go on walks. Or even just my best lines come when I'm doing dishes, believe it or not.
Absolutely.
Talk about work, cleaning the house or whatnot. And just constantly paying attention and caring for your obsessions, nurturing them, watering them. You talk about irrigation, and I think that's what it is. Creative work is irrigating your mind, irrigating your subjects and your themes with questions that propel you forward, that enrichen your project, rather than just sitting down and telling, oh, well, I better get, 10 or 20 pages down today, or else I'm a failure. Oftentimes that's how we think, and I think that's quite toxic to the creative mind.
And you and I have talked a bit about our rural backgrounds.
Yes.
And so I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about growing up with that rural mindset, and how does that inform the work you do now?
Yeah, it's fascinating. My grandfather is an American veteran, and he met my grandmother when he was serving in Vietnam. And it was very strange that neither of them had been to the big city in their respective countries. My grandmother was from Gokam in the rice paddies. My grandfather was in rural Michigan, where he would step out on his front porch and there'll be no other lights for miles, and it's just fields of wheat and corn. And Saigon was the first metropolis that they've ever stepped into. And despite not knowing the language to speak to one another, my grandfather didn't know Vietnamese, my grandmother didn't know English, they understood each other through the memory of where they came from. I think they were able to joke and laugh about, the ridiculousness of city life coming from their roots. And that was their bond. And ultimately they fell in love from those roots. And so to me, I always carried that mindset with me, because that's the morals. It's not just the landscape, it's the morals, it's the values that come out of that, for better or for worse. It's just how we are made up. And we were talking, and you said that even to this day, you feel so guilty going to a fancy restaurant when you can cook so well at home. And I feel the same way. Even though we could afford these luxuries that our parents couldn't have, we still hear them talking in our head, this, for this much, or $50 for this, I could do. So we can hear them. And I think that never really leaves us.
Yeah, I remember when I was growing up, my grandmother would make German chocolate cake. And I was so excited to get the German chocolate cake, and I would go out to her place, and she would cut a tiny sliver, because she was determined to make that German chocolate cake last for 2 weeks. Today we made breakfast.
Yeah.
I cooked a dozen eggs and made all kinds of quinoa and stuff.
Yeah.
Served it, and I felt so tidy.
It's pride too. It still instills in us a sense of pride. I love that. I think that a lot of Americans are that way. Sometimes we think that the metropolis is the only place where things are worthwhile or things are new and fresh and valuable. But I think a lot of Americans perhaps come from these rural roots, and they have to hide it. They have to perform the metropolis vernacular and suppress their own. And it's very interesting to see even myself moving from one space to another and code switching, if you will.
You grew up in Hartford, so that was not country, nor is New York. So would it be fair to say that the country you remember is the country of your grandmother's stories rather than your own personal experience?
Absolutely. And like I said, it was the morals and values of the country, and even the accent, right? We talked about this.
I think that's a great story.
The accent of... the whole time growing up, I thought I was speaking Vietnamese, just like any other Vietnamese person. But when I was on a panel of Vietnamese American writers, we had a question proposed to us at the end, and everybody answered in their Vietnamese, and I realized how different it was from mine. And I realized that their Vietnamese was the educated Vietnamese. It's the Harvard Vietnamese, right? And then I said, oh Lord, I looked in my head and I said, well, the only Vietnamese I got is the Appalachian Vietnamese.
Exactly like what?
Yeah. So I said, oh Lord, here we go. They're not, they're in for it here, So when it came my turn, I just spoke the only Vietnamese I knew. And in English, I'm quite articulate. And so when I started speaking, I saw everyone in the audience sort of take a little jolt. and my the people on my panel, they turned to me a bit, and then I can imagine them thinking, who the heck let this country bumpkin in, And it sounded like I was in the backwoods, but that's the only Vietnamese I knew. I'm proud of that, because that is my truth, and that is my first language. That is my mother tongue, even though it's sort of breached sort of social moments and borders. I'm okay with that. I actually think it's the outsiders, people who speaking a dialect or a vernacular outside of the standard, that are most innovative. Like, for example, my mother often says, and I don't even know if this is an actual Vietnamese word, you can find this in a dictionary, but oftentimes, because of a limited vocabulary, my family and the people from my village would sort of have emotional onomatopoeias, if you will, right? So like bang is an onomatopoeia. There's emotional ones that Vietnamese do. So like if you're confused, you would say, galo pho, fuck pho. You say, she's galo pho, fuck pho, right? And that's one word that they would just say.
So it's just all of those syllables, just one word.
Yeah. And Vietnamese is monosyllabic, right? But it kind of broke the rules in itself when it says make up that sound, and you can feel it. You can actually feel chaos and disorientation. It sounds like a butterfly careening in the fields. It's galova, right? And again and again, there's all these emotional onomatopoeias to describe things that are more accurate, I feel, bodily, sonically, than the definition itself. And so people are always inventing new ways to speak. I grew up, of course, in Hartford, in a predominantly black community when I arrived in America. And what we tell one another there, when we instead of hello or how are you, is what's good. And it's very telling. You can tell about the lives of the people how they greet each other, because it's a rough neighborhood. There's a lot of poverty. Many people are down and out and don't have jobs, and it's tough. It's almost as if pain is a given. We know there's pain, so we want to know what's good off the bat. I think it's a very beautiful way to communicate with one another, that I want to introduce myself with knowing what's your best, right? What is your best? Because it's been rough for everyone. And so we say, hey, what's good? Hey, what's good? And then you go from there. It's always the outsiders who are innovating language and making it exciting.
You have some traction in your work. We came home last night, and I read your wonderful essay in the New Yorker. So, so you're finding
that little thing,
you're finding your way into all kinds of recognition at the top level of what poets aspire to. Could you talk a little bit about how you've enjoyed being able to work at that level and be recognized at that level, and talk about what your goals are as a poet with the kind of notice that you've been getting? I know I've read the New Yorker articles about you. You've been reviewed in the New York Times. You're on NPR, all of the venues. Yeah. How are you working with that? What is your goal now that you have a platform that large?
I don't think my goals ever changed. I think I'm surprised. I don't think any poet is foolish enough to expect to be in these spaces. You gear yourself with rejections, and I myself get rejected all the time. I mean, that's the life of the poet. What you see is just the small, brief moments, often very lucky moments. My goals have never changed. I think for me as a writer, language is an act of communication. Poetry is an act of communication. Otherwise, I would write in my journal, and that would be okay too. But I made the commitment to communicate with my fellow human beings. And the way I see it is that these venues are means of that communication. It gets more eyes on it. I can speak to more people. And beyond that, that's the only value that I really see in it. I don't see any of the prestige, although I realize that's all there. I see these venues as just means of transport. Very good means, respectable means of transport, but that's what it is to me. If you're riding on the subway, you get on and then you focus on where you need to go. You don't stay on the subway and check it out, or you don't examine it. Oh, should I live here? Is this what kind of chairs? What kind of plastic are these chairs made of, or what have you? You just get on. When it's time to get off, you get off. And that's what I see publication is. I send something to something. I say, is this a good vehicle? Is this a good bus? Is it a good train? And if it's good enough, I'll get on and I'll get to where I need to go, find my people, and then continue. I don't want to be attached to the prestige, because that is abstract and it's not a potent place to create new work.
So in closing, I'd like to ask you to read one of your pieces.
All right. Well, we've been talking about fields, and this little piece was me imagining my parents at the moment of my conception. They spent a lot of their times in the field because it was where they had privacy at night. And I imagine many people from rural places can recognize this, that the night and the field is their room, their moment of intimate space. Like anyone else, they fled there and hid from adults, and is where they were able to love each other. And of course, there's biblical references to Eden as well. That's always on my mind. That's the Western influence. A little closer to the edge. Young enough to believe nothing will change them. They step hand in hand into the bomb crater. The night full of black teeth. His faux Rolex, weeks from shattering against her cheek, now dims like a miniature moon behind her hair. In this version, the snake is headless, stilled like a cord unraveled from the lover's ankles. He lifts her white cotton skirt, revealing another hour. His hands, the syllables inside them. O Father, O foreshadow, press into her as the field shreds itself with cricket cries. Show me how ruin makes a home out of hip bones. O Mother, O minute hand, teach me how to hold a man the way thirst holds water. Let every river envy our mouths. Let every kiss hit the body like a season, where apples thunder the earth with red hooves. And I am your son.
And that, my friends, was Ocean Vuong reading some of his poetry and talking about how he views the world. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to know more about the Imaginative Storm work and find out how you can join us on Saturday morning for the Imaginative Storm Writing Prompt of the Week, go to imaginativestorm.com. And on that note, thank you once again for listening. I'm your host, James Navé, and I do hope you listen to more of our Imaginative Storm offerings. Till then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.